Hello there and welcome to this week's Deep Dive. My name's Honor Criswick, I'm a meteorologist and presenter here at the Met Office. Now, we had a fair amount of rain over the weekend, some weather warnings in force, and now the weather's turned dry, settled, and it's felt quite chilly during the first part of the morning. That is all down to high pressure, very much dominating our weather today and over the next coming days. But what we'll find is as we head into Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that this area of high pressure will eventually move its way towards Scandinavia, move its way towards the Baltic Sea. So we'll start to see a slight change in our wind direction. So today and yesterday we had more of a northerly, northwesterly component to our wind, so we got more of an Arctic maritime air mass crossing us in the UK. So things have felt chillier. We've even had some frost in places. In fact, yesterday all four home nations actually dropped below 0 degrees Celsius, particularly in any rural spots. And it's likely we'll see those similar conditions over the coming days. Now, as we head into tomorrow, you'll notice already this area of high pressure starting to drift its way eastwards, situated to the northeast of the country. A front does try and edge its way into the northwest, but because it's pushing into that area of high pressure, it doesn't really get very far and it doesn't really amount to much. So still, once again, tomorrow, many areas seeing a dry, settled day, sunny spells, but once again, it could still be a fairly chilly start, particularly in the west. So once again, some frost in places, potentially some mist and fog, but clearing quite readily through the course of the morning. So that's tomorrow. Now, as we head through into Thursday, once again, high pressure still continuing to push its way eastwards, and we're starting to see a change in our wind direction. Remember, winds around an area of high pressure, they move in a clockwise direction. So if we follow these isobars round, starting to see more of an east-southeasterly component to our wind. Now, what this can do is pick up some moisture from the North Sea, so we could see a bit more cloud, particularly across south and southeastern parts as we head through into Thursday, particularly during the morning, breaking up a bit more into the afternoon. Some of this could be thick enough to produce the odd isolated shower. You'll be very unlucky if you catch one though, I think. And then on Friday, once again, high pressure still pushing its way eastwards. We're starting to see some development starting to push in from the west, but through the bulk of the day, remaining dry and settled once again. But just with our change in wind direction, it's likely we'll see a bit more cloud, so things aren't going to feel as chilly during the morning. And also a change in wind direction, so a slight change in our air mass, no longer getting that northerly flow of air. So things probably won't feel as chilly in the morning by the time we reach Friday. Let's take a look at temperatures then, because they have been of interest, particularly this week, as things have felt a bit cooler during the morning. But daytime temperatures are actually okay. They're not really changing that much, around about average for the time of year. Mid to high teens for many areas, the warmest often being across the far southeast, where we might just push in to the high teens in these areas. But particularly in the start of the week, even though temperatures have been fairly similar, because we've had that quite brisk northerly wind, things have felt that bit cooler. So we'll start to feel that change through the end of the week, even though temperatures themselves aren't really changing. And let's take a look at minimum temperatures too, because particularly across northern and western areas, that's where they have dropped just below freezing, and mostly in rural areas under any prolonged clear periods. But most towns and cities, which is what these temperatures are representing, have stayed around the mid to high single figures, low double digits. But you can see in Scotland, for example, we did just drop into the mid single figures, so feeling chillier here. But heading into Thursday and Friday, things are starting to turn that little bit milder, but elsewhere not really changing too much. So the weather itself is going to be fairly similar, dry, settled, sunny spells, perhaps a little bit more cloud across the skies towards the end of the week. But with that change in wind direction, there's just going to be that different feel to the weather. So not feeling quite as chilly, but overall by the afternoon, probably feeling quite similar to what it has done earlier in the week. How about the weekend? That's when we could start to see a bit of a change. So let's go ahead and take a look at our bigger picture once again and head our way into Saturday. Now, we've got this system here, obviously high pressure no longer dominating the weather quite as much, drifting its way more eastwards. That's allowing a system to come through. And it may potentially bring some rain, particularly across the west, but there's still actually quite a lot of uncertainty over the weekend. Why is that then? Well, it's all thanks to this area of low pressure here. This is currently Hurricane Gabrielle, and this is where approximately it will likely sit as we head through into Saturday, and it's probably going to track more towards the Bay of Biscay, moving into parts of Spain and Portugal. It might actually bring some potentially quite impactful weather across the Azores, heavy rain, strong winds. It could even still be classed as a hurricane as it moves across the Azores. And it's been quite a slow-moving feature, actually. If I turn the jet stream back on, it's not really being picked up by the jet stream, and that means it's kind of drifting its way. If I just play this through, here it is down here. It just kind of drifts its way across the Atlantic, and it's been with us for a fair few days now, and it's likely tracked just continuing its way east-northeastwards towards the Bay of Biscay. So overall, it's unlikely, it's around a less than 5% chance actually, but we'll go more into that in a moment, of this system actually tracking its way across the UK, bringing us some stormy conditions. Very, very unlikely to do that, less than 5% chance. It's highly likely that it'll actually move towards parts of Spain and Portugal, but it is still having an impact on our weather. So I'm just going to switch this off and turn on our air mass temperatures. Because, well, actually, if I just switch the rain back on for a moment, you can see that this Hurricane Gabrielle is still linked with this frontal system that is moving its way in from the west as we head into Saturday. So the low itself isn't, but this frontal system moving through is linked to this area of low pressure. And what we find with these systems, obviously areas of low pressure moving in an anti-clockwise direction. We've got high pressure to the east moving in a clockwise direction. This all fueling that south to southwesterly flow as we get into Saturday. So we'll start to see a little bit of warm advection just pushing into parts of the southwest, parts of western Wales as well. And what we find with warm advection is that it can sometimes just throw up a bit of a ridge. That's ahead of the trough that's pushing this system, or pushing any areas of low pressure in from the west. And so with a ridge of high pressure starting to build across the southwest, that means any rainfall that's associated with this feature probably won't become too heavy, particularly as it continues to drift its way eastwards into the southeast of England, for example. So because of this warm advection taking place, all due to Gabrielle just sitting further down to the southwest, throwing up that ridge, there's a chance that this feature may not be quite as intense perhaps as it does so initially as it moves in from the west. But it's still tricky to forecast. Obviously the track of Gabrielle might change slightly, and that will change where the ridge could potentially be or if it forms at all. So that's adding to the uncertainty over the weekend. What we can find as well, as this system is linked with this front that's moving across, just switch that off, is that it can in a way buckle this system and turn this more into a waving feature. So that means some areas, particularly in the west, it's looking likely, could see some quite persistent downpours through much of the day, and actually across the east and southeast they won't see much rain at all, and it's probably going to be similar to what we'll have earlier in the week, dry, sunny spells, mostly settled. But if that waving feature doesn't quite buckle as much as we perhaps thought, then this system might continue to push its way eastwards, and actually eastern areas might start to pick up some of that rain. So forecast confidence is probably slightly higher than what it was yesterday, all thanks to more ensemble members agreeing a bit more about the track and intensity of Gabrielle. But actually there is still some uncertainty, even though the weekend's only a few days away. But what I can tell you is that we'll likely see a slight change on the weekend. So it's likely that we'll start to see some rain push in from the west, but it's just more central, eastern parts of England. There's still that bit more uncertainty there around the weather. So Hurricane Gabrielle not affecting the UK in as much as it's moving across us, bringing wet and windy stormy weather, but it is having an impact as it's situated so close to us. Now, hurricane season has actually been fairly quiet. We had the peak of the season earlier into last week. Actually, the peak is probably the first couple of weeks of September. It's been fairly quiet, but there's currently some more disturbances going on in the Atlantic basin, Gabrielle being one of them, and potentially a couple of others. So I got in our hurricane expert, Julian, to talk about this in a bit more detail. So hello, Julian. Thank you for joining us on this week's Deep Dive. You're a familiar face to our audience, so I'm sure everyone is glad that you're back. Let's talk hurricanes. So this season was forecast to be above average, but it's been relatively quiet, bearing in mind that it's the first couple of weeks of September that is usually where we see the kind of peak of the season. But so far, we haven't seen a lot of activity, have we?
It's been relatively quiet. I think we can see that if we go to this first image, which shows all the Atlantic tropical cyclones for so far this season up until this last week. Now we have got one at the moment called Gabrielle, which we'll talk about in a bit. But this shows all the storms prior to that. So early in the season we had some kind of weak, short-lived storms like Andrea, Barry, Chantal, and then there was Dexter. But the one which really kicked the season in was Hurricane Erin, which was in the first part of August. And that's the first of what we call a Cabo Verde type hurricane. So it's one which develops near the Cabo Verde Islands, which is over here, just off Western Africa. And it forms from an African easterly wave, which is the kind of disturbances which are the spawning ground for tropical cyclones through the season. Now, Erin moved across the deep tropical Atlantic as a tropical storm. It didn't actually develop too much, and maybe that's an indication of the issues that we might discuss in a moment. And then it was when it got just north of the Caribbean and on this part here, it explosively deepened into a Category 5 hurricane and then turned and came across the Atlantic, became an extratropical storm and headed off in the northeasterly direction. In fact, it was Erin and then the one following it, Fernand, which sort of brought an end to our summer weather, because they kind of perturbed the jet stream and led to that breakdown in the warm, dry weather in the last week of August, which we saw. But that was, as I said, the last week of August, and since then there was absolutely nothing. Now there's several thoughts as to what's caused that, because we would normally during the first week of September, first couple of weeks of September, see quite a lot of activity, and there's possible reasons for that. Firstly, the Azores high. Now the Azores are up here, in here, and there's normally a kind of persistent area of high pressure in this area. Now we think that the Azores high was a little bit stronger and pushing a little bit further south than usual during that period. Now with the winds circulating clockwise around the high pressure area, it was dragging in this northeasterly flow off the west coast of Africa down into the deep tropics, and it was bringing drier air and air which was much more stable. So it meant that any storm clouds which tried to develop in this zone didn't have the energy, didn't have the moisture to really get going. So that was one possible reason. Also, the West African monsoon itself, which is where you get a lot of rain and moisture coming off West Africa in the easterly waves, was a lot more suppressed than usual. So there have been easterly waves coming off Africa, but they're not so potent as they have been in some other seasons. They're drier and less amplified. And also there's a third possible reason for the suppressed activity, and that's wind shear over this part of the Atlantic. Now wind shear is when the winds vary as you go up through the atmosphere, and if you get a kind of stronger winds at the top than at the surface, then it can act to shear off any developing storms, and that was certainly prevalent in this area. So probably a combination of all those three things led to this quiet spell. But the quiet spell has ended now, and we do have some activity in the Atlantic.
Yes, because it was similar to last year, you were telling me earlier, where we had a bit of a quieter spell, and then all of a sudden it started to ramp up and we saw a few storms.
Yes, that's right. We were expecting a very, very active season last season, and we got well behind in September with that level of activity. But then the back end of the season, through late September, right through October and into early November, was really active, and so it kind of picked up after that, and we kind of caught up. And we ended up having an above average season, although not quite as above average as we thought it might be earlier on in the season.
But so things might be starting to change now this season. We've got Hurricane Gabrielle, which is this one, if I'm right.
That's right,
and then a couple of other disturbances.
Yes, Gabrielle developed some days ago down in the deep tropics here. It was a tropical storm in this zone, and again it struggled when it was in the deep tropics. It struggled to really get itself together. It was a weak tropical storm for many days, but it's only when it moved up into this zone north of the Caribbean that it suddenly strengthened, and over the last couple of days it's been a Category 4 hurricane, close to that now, and it's starting to turn around and head off into the mid-latitudes. Yes, we do need to make a note of these two areas of cloud here, just to the east of the Caribbean. We'll mention those in a moment as to possible further developments. But of interest at the moment is what's going to happen to Gabrielle, because it has turned and it is heading off in a more kind of easterly direction now.
Yes, and we think that's linked to the sea surface temperatures, am I right?
Well, certainly the rapid strengthening there has been in the last day or so of Gabrielle. Maybe this plot shows the sea temperature anomaly, so it's the difference to average. And you can see across the deep tropical part of the Atlantic, the anomaly is, there's not much of an anomaly basically. There's a few pockets of below average, there's a few pockets of slightly above average, but not much difference. But once you get up into the subtropics and up into this, almost up into the mid-latitudes, the sea temperature is a lot higher, as shown by the yellows and reds. Sea temperatures are a lot higher than they normally are this time of year. And certainly when Gabrielle got into this kind of zone, that was when it really strengthened, because it's hit areas of high sea temperature, and also the atmospheric conditions have been right for it to develop in that way as well.
Yeah.
But then the key thing is what happens next. And we've got, I think, a forecast,
we've got a track here.
Forecast plot which shows us what might be happening next. Now these plots show ensemble tracks from the tropical cyclone. So if I start on the far left here, this shows what we've taken 3 ensemble models. The ensembles are where we run the model many times and get slightly different solutions. And there's 3 different models here. There's MOGREPS, which is the Met Office ensemble system, ECMWF, the European Centre, and the NCEP, the American model. And you can see that this is where Gabrielle is now and the possible tracks. Now, one thing to note, particularly from this, is that it's keeping a long way south. It's got a easterly motion and heading towards the Azores, which is in this area here. Now, sometimes hurricanes, when they move into the higher latitudes, they gain latitude quite quickly, they engage with the jet stream and then can kind of race across the Atlantic really quickly. Now, the models are saying that's not likely to happen with Gabrielle. It will move a lot slower and further south, so not engaging with the jet stream. And we are likely to see some impacts in the Azores. The likelihood is Gabrielle, and it may still be a hurricane, even when it does so, move across the Azores and produce some very strong winds and heavy rain. Then after that, you can see the lines, and this shows a probability plot. This shows just the individual lines. They kind of spread out, which is an indication of uncertainty. Now, actually, yesterday, if you looked at a plot like this yesterday, it was even more spread. It's narrowed a bit now, and the highest probability outcome is that a weakening storm, it'll probably become an extratropical storm by then, will head towards possibly Portugal, Spain, or up into Biscay. And actually, this plot on the far side shows the forecast of intensity. And you can see from that that the top plot is wind and it's on a downward trend. The bottom plot is the central pressure on an upward trend. So that indicates the storm is likely to be weakening. So what we expect, and these tracks here are all kind of late in the weekend, even into early next week. It's quite a long way ahead. We expect Gabrielle, or a weakening version of Gabrielle, to be somewhere sitting out here and may eventually make a landfall. But we don't think it'll be severe in terms of winds at that time. Certainly the intensity forecasts show that it should be a weakening system by then. We can't rule out the very small chance that it could take a track a little bit further north, which would be closer to the UK. But at the moment, the most likely track is this heading towards the more southern parts of Europe.
Yeah, it's unlikely to kind of move through the UK as an actual storm, isn't it? But there's a chance that just from it moving even to the south of us, that it could have an impact on a front that's coming over in the weekend, which is why we've already spoken about quite a lot of the uncertainty for the weekend weather. So even though it's not crossing the UK, it's still having an impact.
It is often the case that the hurricanes which cross the Atlantic, occasionally they will make a direct impact on the UK. A lot of the times they don't. They might whiz up towards the north, towards Iceland, or as this one, head down towards southern Europe, but may still cause uncertainty in the forecast in other aspects of the forecast for the UK, and that looks possible for this weekend, yes. Yeah.
So we've got another plot here. It's not one we usually show, but it helps kind of describe the eastern African easterly waves.
Yes.
I was getting my words muddled up there.
I thought I'd introduce this one for the deep dive, since we've got a bit more time to discuss it. It's called a Hofmöller plot, and so if I can go through the various aspects of it. First of all, time goes from Longest to go at the top, down to most recent at the bottom. So here we've got early September. The black line is actually now, so that's today.
Okay.
And the bottom half is the forecast from the Met Office model. And what the colours are showing are the tracks of easterly waves going. You can see the map here with the kind of cut-out map, which is showing the zone it's talking about from Africa through to the Caribbean here. And the stronger colours are where we have stronger easterly waves. And this just illustrates nicely what we've seen recently and what we're seeing at the moment, because they're not always very coherent. You can see they were a bit muddled earlier in the month. There's nothing really strong. And then we had Gabrielle, which is this wave here, which came through here. Now you see it appears to just go from the map. That's because it moved northwards out of the zone which the map is dealing with, if you like. So that's Gabrielle. But then we've got these other two strong waves here, and you can see where they intersect the black line. That shows where they are now. So you've got one here which lines up with this spot here on the map, and one here which lines up with this spot here on the map. And those are the two disturbances that we saw in the satellite image earlier. And particularly the one which is further west, the forecast shows it continuing in the deeper tropics, possibly across this zone just north of the Caribbean up towards the Bahamas. So that's definitely one to watch. So I thought it was interesting to show this to illustrate how these easterly waves track across the Atlantic during the season, and we can match them up, if you like, with the satellite image and with the systems that we're trying to track into the forecast.
Okay, I think I'd need to stare at this for a bit longer to get my head around it. But I get the general gist. So we've got Gabrielle, possibly two other disturbances, and we've got the track here. I did have a look at the names, what they would be if they were named storms, and it's Humberto and Imelda. Great hurricane names there, if they were to be named. But this is potentially where they could... it's not the track, is it? Sorry,
it's where they could form. Yes,
it's where they could
this
form,
is the output by the National Hurricane Centre, who deals with all the hurricanes in the Atlantic zone, and they put these outlooks out. They update them every 12 hours, just to show where the existing storms are. So we've got Gabrielle marked on there, but also the areas where there's potential development. And actually, on their website, if you were to hover over these areas, it will give you a kind of commentary on what they expect to happen. But basically what we expect, these are the two disturbances we saw on the satellite image. This one in red means it's got a high probability of development, and that's the kind of zone they expect it to move into. So they do expect it to turn northwestwards away from land. This one here, not quite such a high probability of development at the moment, but it may be in a few days' time. This one though, we have to watch it carefully because it could develop somewhere near the Bahamas or even getting in towards southeast USA. And if that happens and it becomes a tropical storm, and if it was to become a hurricane quite quickly, there'd have to be very short lead time forecasts or warnings of potential land impacts. So we need to watch that one carefully. So this illustrates where we expect possible the next two developments over the next 5 to 7 days or so.
Okay, so yeah, we're starting to see signals then that things are potentially ramping up. We've got this as well for the potential other two disturbances.
Yes, what I've done, I've gone back to the ensemble predictions again, but this time looking at them in a slightly different way. This is a snapshot of the 5-day forecast from all the ensembles. So all the dots represent where an ensemble member might think a storm might be in 5 days' time. So we're talking here Sunday. And I've circled the two clusters because they do appear as two distinct clusters because of those two disturbances. So basically the models are suggesting that in 5 days' time we expect the first storm, the one further east, to be sitting just north of the Caribbean in this zone, maybe south of Bermuda, and the second cluster in here, closer to the Bahamas, and again, as I said just now, potentially more of a threat of landfall.
Yeah.
So the indications are there from the forecast models as well. And actually from this you can also see right up in the top corner, all the dots underneath the key there. That indicates Gabrielle, or what might be ex-Gabrielle by that time, going across the Azores and heading off towards southern Europe.
And we've got a satellite image here of Gabrielle, haven't we? Is this from this morning?
Yes, that's just from this morning. So it's kind of flickering because it was going from night time into daytime, so visible imagery. But yes, that shows, you can see the distinct eye. It's been category 4 for a while. You can see it's a little bit lopsided. There's a little bit of kind of dry air or shear impinging on the western side of the storm, and we think it might have peaked in intensity. And as I showed earlier with that forecast plot, we do expect it over the next few days to gradually weaken as it moves out across the Atlantic towards the Azores.
I do enjoy a good satellite loop of a hurricane, I can't deny, especially being able to see the eye. Like, yeah, proper nerding out there on that one. And of course, we can't not talk about another typhoon, Ragasa, is it?
Ragasa, yes.
Taking place near southern China.
Yes, we certainly shouldn't forget this, because this is a significant one. Developed some days ago out in the Philippine Sea. So here's the Philippines here, here's southern China. This is a satellite image from just a few hours ago. Again, it peaked at about category 5. Yeah. And in fact, it was we've actually had a relatively slow start, as in the Western Pacific, the storms haven't been particularly strong this season. There's been quite a lot of them, and there's been a fair few typhoons, but this is the first one which actually reached equivalent of category 3 or above. And actually, it's very unusual to get this late in the season without getting one that strong. But this certainly made up for it, and it passed over these islands just to the north of Luzon, which is the main island of the Philippines. So it had direct impacts on some of these islands here yesterday. It's now out over the South China Sea and weakened slightly, but we don't expect a huge amount of weakening, maybe a little bit more as it moves towards the coast of China. And we expect it to make landfall tomorrow between, there's Hong Kong, there's Hong Kong there, and there's Hainan Island. This is the track from the official agency, the Japanese meteorological agency in that region. And they expect it to come in at a fairly oblique angle. That makes it very difficult to pinpoint exactly where landfall might be.
Okay.
But the current expectations, it'll be in this zone, part of southern China. But because of that bleak angle of approach, it will impact a lot of different areas. So although we might have a landfall in this zone here, it'll rake along the coast and across this part of southern China and even into this part of Vietnam in here over the next few days. So the impacts on this could last for several days, certainly very strong winds and heavy rain across this whole zone over the next 3 to 4 days, we expect.
So the potential there, I see what you mean, going around coastal areas, potential to cause quite a lot of impacts in a few different areas. Yes. So quite a powerful storm. So this is the strongest Western Pacific typhoon for almost 2 years. Yes. I have written down.
That's right, yes. We didn't get one this strong last season. We had quite a few strong ones, but this one just topped it all in the Western Pacific. And yes, I think it was October of 2 years ago was the last time we had one stronger than this in the Western Pacific. Yeah,
that's why we could not mention it. Obviously, our focus was on the North Atlantic, but it didn't feel right to not focus it. I'm going to get this satellite picture up because I quite like it. But I think that's everything we wanted to talk about, Julian. So thank you so much for joining me again. Okay, it's always a pleasure to have you on. And that's it for today's deep dive. So thank you for joining us up until this point. And of course, if you liked the video, make sure to press the like button. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have any further questions for Julian or myself, probably to pass on to Julian, it's me and Alex Burkill on the live this Friday at 12:15. So leave them in the comments box and we'll try and answer some then. But otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed. Have a great week and we'll see you again very soon.